So regardless of the sport that you coach, things evolve. Like the way the game is played, it changes over time. I think one of the traps that many coaches fall into is chasing after the newest shiny thing, right? We see a team have a lot of success running a new formation, or they may have a new offensive or defensive system, or they might even emphasize skill development in a certain way, or they just might come out with a really catchy team mantra or slogan. And then we as coaches, we chase after that new shiny object. We change our formation the next season, or we implement the new tactical system, or we change the way we do skill development, or we slap a new slogan on a t-shirt or on the locker room wall. And sometimes those changes are positive. They are us evolving and learning and growing from the best out there. But a lot of times they're not. Like we're missing what's really happening. Yes, those tactical and technical things are good, but there's something else behind it all that makes it successful. Today's guest is Mark Cascio, who's not only the head basketball coach at Catholic High School in Baton Rouge, but he's the owner of Courtside Consulting, which supports basketball coaches' learning and development. In the world of basketball, he is blowing up because of the drive and space offense that he has run and perfected. Now, I'm fortunate to call Mark a close friend, and in 2018, he joined the mentorship program, and I've been supporting him and his team since then. And it's given me a unique perspective that I think few people talk about or realize about his success. Who he is as a person, how he leads, and how intentional and committed he is to building his culture. So in part one of our conversation, we're going to dive into the things that he has done to build his culture. And in our next episode, part two, we'll discuss what I believe is really the key to his success: how he learns and grows, which is what we are all about on this podcast. Thanks for listening in to the Coaching Culture Podcast. For those of you who don't know me, I'm JP Nurbin, the founder of Thrive on Challenge, and I'm joined by my co-host, Nate Sanderson. We help coaches to improve their culture, not just through this podcast, but through our mentorship program and community. You can learn more about that at thriveonchallenge.com and also get our very detailed notes to every podcast. Mark, excited to have you on the podcast today, brother. This has been a long time coming. I want to get us started off probably talking about a topic that you don't normally talk about when you are a guest on podcasts, and that is your approach towards your culture and your leadership. And knowing you over the last 3 years and having that privilege of kind of working with you and your program, I know as intentional as you are when it comes to the tactical and technical side of the game of basketball, you are just as intentional when it comes to the cultural side, but it wasn't always that case. So I was thinking maybe you could kind of start us off with just sharing a little bit of your journey towards understanding the importance of culture and leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, thanks for having me on. Excited to talk to you and Nate, and I'm excited to talk about culture and leadership rather than all X's and O's, like you said. I normally am a guest at, and that's kind of where my coaching journey began. Is just really focused on X's and O's. I was a 21-year-old head coach, and I felt like that was just the most important thing, and that the way you win games is just out coaching everybody X's and O's, or some people say it's about the Jimmies and the Joes. But I feel the natural progression as any coach kind of went the same as mine, where you're really into the X's and O's and you want better plays, and um, then you go to understanding the importance of what it means to run a practice, and then what it means to run a program that's organized and put together. But I think the sign of a master coach is one that incorporates culture into all of those things, where we all say we want better players and we want them to play hard, smart, and together. And as a younger coach, I just didn't realize that culture drives those things. It's not really what your system of play or your skill development. It's really your culture drives all of those things. And that's really what wins games in the end. If you want teams to share the ball and communicate and be leaders, you as the coach need to build the culture that builds players in order to do that.
Yeah, and it's always interesting because I see a lot of other coaches talk about how they love your offense, how sharp it is. And I sit back and I understand how you're so good at all the other things that really contribute to the success of that. How has your culture and your approach towards it evolved in the last 3 to 4 years?
I think before, just as a younger coach getting in, is I knew I wanted to impact players and impact their lives on and off the floor. So really cared about their education, cared about their home life, but it was really hard for me to do that within basketball, meaning like I'm going to care about, your school and your mental health, but don't you dare mess up in basketball, because then the hammer's going to come down and you're going to have these consequences because you're making it harder on me to do what I want to do. So I think just shifting my perspective of more transformational coaching where we always wanted relationships, but just it's more of an emphasis on building better people, and better people are going to make better basketball players. So I think just in my own personal journey and growth, it's just been focusing more on that and knowing that the byproduct of that is going to be that we have better people, which will be better basketball players, which will help us accomplish everything that we want to accomplish.
Mark, you mentioned that phrase transformational coaching, and that's something that we obviously talk a lot about on the podcast here. I'm curious for you, what does that phrase mean? Like when you talk about transformational coaching and trying to infuse that in your program and have it be a thread, through all your levels and all your activities, what does that mean to you?
I think it goes back to just what I said with my own personal growth of putting the emphasis on relationships and building people and building character. And um, it wasn't until JP made an initial visit to come observe my program where he really said, what's the just the overriding goal of the program? Take wins, losses out, take trophies out of the equation. And I guess what it came down to me is I wanted players to just not have that like, man, we just hit a wall or the wind is out of our sails, and how are we going to pick this back up together? So we kind of just boiled it down to just every member has a meaningful and memorable experience. And I think if you're creating that and you're building good people and better relationships, I think that's transformational coaching to me.
So what were some of the things that you weren't doing a few years ago that you are doing now that are helping to create that meaningful, memorable experience?
Gosh, a lot. I mean, for one, more one-on-ones with players. Um, I'm much more proactive really with everything, especially with parents. I think gosh, looking back, that's probably the way our program has grown the most is more partners with our parents, much more transparent. I felt like I was very guarded in the past for really no reason other than the fact that I was trying to probably hide some things or run from some hard conversations. But also with players and coaching them, I think I'm more dedicated to solving the right problem. So to kind of go back with my personal growth, I mentioned like don't mess up in basketball because the hammer's coming down. Where I remember one of our first conversations, I was talking about a player that just he would forget his water bottle, and if he didn't forget his water bottle, he'd forget his shoes for a road game, and then another day he would lack energy, and he was just very inconsistent, but a talented player. And I would get mad at him, and I think what we've really changed in our culture is we're all about solving the right problem. So more of what's the obstacle? Why is he not doing those things? And how can I be part of the solution instead of just giving him consequences for his problem?
Just this season alone, you have a really special story of success. In the previous couple of years, you were making the final or semifinal, and I think this year you guys finished in the state quarterfinals. But I remember you texted me after that. It's just like it felt really, really good, you know. And not a lot of times when coaches are traditionally making it the semifinals or finals and they go out in the quarters, do they have that type of experience? But you did. You felt really, really good at the end of the season when you lost. I was hoping you could share a little bit about why that felt so good for you this year.
Yeah, like you said, we lost in the quarters, and the past 3 years we've won back district championships and had back to back Final Four appearances. So expectations have we've created high expectations and standard for ourselves, and losing in the quarters has kind of been uncharted territory. There wasn't a player in our program that hadn't been to that level of going to the Final Four. And our the end of the season for us, we didn't play very many games down the stretch because we were quarantined, and then we had other schools cancel because they were trying to avoid contact tracing. So we it was a lot of practice and very few games. So it's hard to get a pulse of the team. And as the playoffs started, we're doing okay. We knew the quarterfinals would be a really tough game. And when we lost, and it was a hard fought game, we kind of came storming back in the fourth and just couldn't get over the hump. It was a little bit too little too late. But in the locker room after the game, I remember just I always thank our team for their sacrifice and hard work and for leaving it better than they found it. Um, we had juniors. I mean, the seniors, usually cry or upset, but we had juniors crying in the locker room, and usually, those guys are upset, but they know they have another year. So that kind of caught my attention in the locker room. Just like, man, we were more invested than I probably even gave them credit for. And then after the game, we went up and it was just a really cool environment. Like the seniors were just hugging each other, coming up, hugging me, and then they would walk away for a little bit, and then the same senior would come up and give me another hug, and they ended up just staying in the gym for like an hour, hour and a half after the game. It was just apparent that the families and the seniors and the players just didn't want to leave, and I had parents coming up to me saying, "I feel like we should have done more. I don't think we did enough. Did we do enough?" And
Talking
in the
about themselves as parents, right? It wasn't talking about you or the players. It was themselves, right?
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it was more of, how could we have helped more? Did we support the program enough? And a lot of times seniors have that feeling too, like, "Oh, I wish I would have done more." So it was like the first time parents had kind of came up and just said, I feel like we didn't do enough as parents." I've never had that happen before, especially after a loss that could, I guess everybody just started to expect us to move on in the playoffs. So after I guess a quote unquote disappointing loss, just to have that attitude and that there's just like a good feeling in the gym after a playoff loss, which I think you rarely have.
Mark, I'm curious, as you have grown the culture in your program and the expectations have been high, as you mentioned, just due to prior success year in and year out. How do you feel that that culture has helped maybe players to navigate some of that expectation that comes with the outcomes that you've experienced?
Great question. Yeah, I mean, I think our communication has gotten a lot better. So I think just coaches and players being on the same page as far as embracing the process and our process and our systems really help keep things in perspective. So I try to go the wooden route of talking as little as much or little as possible about winning games and more of the process that we're going to go through and just focusing on the day of getting better. And I think having clear systems in place and clear processes in place to keep the emphasis on the journey rather than the outcome has really helped us. And our leadership continues to get better and better. And winning breeds winning. So I think you just have that natural confidence. So it's more confidence and excitement than pressure.
And you mentioned the parent reaction at the end of that game, and just what I read from the outside is a feeling that they felt like they were part of it in maybe a way that they haven't in the past. And I know a lot of coaches will hear that. They'll think about their own parents and their programs and some of the frustrations maybe that we've all experienced along those lines. What are some things that you've done to try to extend that cultural experience to the parents as well as the players?
This year was a little bit more difficult with COVID. So they were not, as present on campus as much as normal as we normally do. But we invite them to team meals, things like that, or they help with travel. But I think more than anything is being really proactive, being really transparent. I know I used to always dread the parent meeting And I know that's always a hot topic with coaches. And now I honestly look forward to it. In fact, I run the freshman parent meeting, and I told our freshman coach this year, I was like, man, I'm fired up to meet your parents this year and to get in front of them. And he thought I was being sarcastic. And I had to tell him that, like, I genuinely looking forward, because one, we get to share our program, and we're all really, really proud of the work that we put into it. We have a strong culture. And, um, I think anytime you can get in front of somebody and share and sell your program, it's a positive thing. So at the parent meeting, I'm very transparent, very loose. We talk about playing time, we talk about expectations, we talk about our system. Where I think right away their first experience with Calicut basketball is a positive one, where they feel like their kid's going to be treated well. They have a coach that's willing to have conversations with them and be open and transparent. I think that goes a long way.
I want you to unpack a little bit more about what that looks like, because you kind of said those things quickly, and some coaches may not really dwell on what you kind of just shared. So, some of the most beneficial things that you've done in a parent meeting in the last few years.
Um, the big one is always playing time, so we've done a couple different things with playing time as far as just to illustrate the scarcity, because I'm a parent and my daughters play sports, so I see it from both sides. And I think if I wasn't a coach, I would probably look at it through the lens that most parents do, where their kid's the most important. So just try to flip the script on them. And I'll have every parent, like this year, what we did at that freshman parent meeting is every parent sent them a Google form that was completely anonymous, and it just had, our freshman games are 28 minutes. It was just, 1 through 28. How many minutes do you think your son should play? They filled that out, and then as we added those minutes up, we would have to play, almost 2 full games for everybody to get the minutes that they thought their son should play. So right away, I think it just illustrates that, look, we would love to play your son the entire game, but that means that somebody else has to come out of the game. And anytime we take somebody else out, and that person's not getting their minutes. So that's always been well received with the parents, kind of eye opening for them. And then also we will, the analogy that you gave me was just the theme park, of where you can get in the theme park, but you got to be a certain height to ride the ride. And I think just being really honest with parents, I've kind of broke down, the 4 coactives, of a player, of technical, tactical, physical, and spiritual. And I always tell them that typically players will excel in 1 or 2 of these, and then 1 or 2 of these will really be their deficiency. So if they're not playing, we're very clear with the player and the parent, where this is where he really struggles, where he could be really skilled, he could have a great attitude every day, he can understand what we're doing, but he's 5'2" and a buck 20, where just physically he just might not be ready yet, but as he matures, then he can get there. So I think just being very clear with them on that has been some of the best things we've done.
One thing I like that you did this year was you kind of ran a little bit of an offensive clinic, and you kind of taught them about it. And I think some people might hear that, well, of course, I mean, if you're Mark Cassio, it's one thing, but I actually generally think that other coaches just, and I've seen this, when they start to explain why they play the way they play and they're transparent around that, people appreciate that. And I think it helps them see the level of intentionality. I mean, you mentioned, you've probably said transparency, and the word transparency and parents maybe 100 times in our last few
Yeah.
minutes, like just transparency, transparency, transparency. And when I look at having worked with over 30 programs in the last few, year or two, it's like you probably have the least amount of problem conversations around playing time with parents and players. And it's because you are organized and you do those, consistent conversations with the players, and you're really transparent around that process with the parents, right?
Yeah, and good point on talking about, just like our style of play too. Like, we don't set a whole lot of screens off the ball. So if you're a parent with some basketball knowledge, you're going to look at that and say, like, man, they're not even setting screens, and if we're scoring the ball, it doesn't matter. If we're not scoring the ball, that's kind of you might criticize us there. But if you just have some background knowledge of what we're trying to do, and our system is predicated on player development and letting their kid have freedom and be able to shoot the ball when they're open and drive the ball and make plays for themselves, then as a parent, it's a lot easier to watch that and have an understanding of what we're trying to accomplish. So yeah, and that's always fun. And sometimes I feel like I always do it at the end, and I feel like I'm keeping them kind of long, but we'll go like this year. We went back and forth with Q&A, and the parents had some great questions, and I always get emails after just saying how much they appreciated me sharing, both the playing time or our system or our non-negotiables with them, because it really helps them. I always tell them it takes a village to make a successful basketball program, and that goes to working the concession stand or working the gate or bringing us snacks for halftime, whatever it is. It truly does take everybody, but also it takes everybody just to be on board, because I've had years where we do have parent issues, and you're taking time and energy and sleepless nights and putting your thoughts and your energy into that. And every time you're doing that, you're not thinking about their son or the basketball part of it. So once everybody's bought in and everybody's helping, it definitely makes it easier to be successful.
One of the things you mentioned there was just a few minutes ago was about your leadership. It's how the leadership of your program has grown. You're pretty big on your leadership council, your captain's council. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to that, of just how important that system's been for you.
Yeah, so we used to elect captains, and then I went to the old quote of you can select captains but not leaders. So I kind of did away with captains, and our leaders just emerged. But I think having a system to make leadership, to develop leaders, and then making leadership more player led has been a huge impact in our program for me personally and the players. I think getting them in the leadership units has really built closer knit relationships with them. They love it when we huddle up before practice, or we huddle up after practice in their small units, or in team meetings. We'll utilize those units. They love to get together more so than I ever thought. Like, they ask for it when I fall short on that. And then it builds some competition within their units too. So in skill, in practice, when we're doing some skill stuff, we might divide up into leadership units, and they'll compete against each other. They love that. But the player led aspect has been really a game changer for our program. It's so much better communication from player to player, but also with players to coach and coaches to players. I think it's much more democratic than most basketball programs are. I think most basketball programs are led from the top and very authoritarian. I know as a coach, I have a much better pulse of my team, because leadership council is much more likely to share their thoughts with me, because I've opened the door for that. And that used to happen very rarely. I think it could still happen a lot more in our program, but over the years, they come to me, and I feel like they give me genuine opinions rather than what they want me to hear. And it also gives the players a better perspective of my point of view and what my role in the program is. They'll come to me with something, if they come to me with an issue and they're looking at it from the player's perspective, I'll give them the coach's perspective. And sometimes we meet in the middle. Sometimes I go their way. Sometimes it's just, hey, look, we have to stick with what I'm doing because it's best for the team, and here's why. And regardless of the outcome, we have a mutual understanding, and it's much easier for them to take that to their unit and just get everybody else on the same page.
So I just want to take a quick second to let you know that if you're interested in implementing a captain's council, like I've helped Mark implement these last few years, I'd encourage you to check out my online course and resource pack for the Captain's Council that's hosted on coachtube.com. The course lays out every step to implement and has a bunch of other ideas on ways to continuously empower your players to lead, to support the team standards, and to create stronger connections. You can save 10% by using the link in the details of this episode, or by going over that thrive on challenge.com.
Mark, I'm curious, as you've kind of evolved and pursued that player-led program, has there been a change in your leadership and kind of the way that you think about your role that's allowed some of that player empowerment to happen?
Yeah, I think I've removed myself as the ultimate decision maker, and I've allowed players to make decisions for our program, and it's just as people, if we know that we're being heard, if some of our decisions are our decisions, we're going to be much more likely to follow through with those. So I think the biggest shift in my leadership style has been, you know, what am I willing to let them choose to do? Because I know if I let them choose, they're going to be they're going to be more bought into that, and they're going to be more willing to stick with it and hold each other accountable to those standards. So them creating some processes for us or them setting standards for us has paid a lot of dividends. So, for instance, this year, some of our non-negotiables are we are on time, we're prepared, and we're engaged. So we define those three things, and we lift in the mornings before school in the fall. So if our lift started at 7 a.m., I let them determine what's on time. And some guys were saying we should be there by 6:45. Other guys are like, whoa, 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 what about 6:55? So we just set a standard that if we were in the weight room and dressed, ready to go, which would be prepared by 6:55 a.m., that is on time. Instead of me just saying, this is what time we're going to be here, having them decide what on time is goes a long way. And that way, they set the standard, and we're just enforcing that standard and supporting them to the standard that they created.
What I think is powerful about that, and sometimes is a bit of a shift for coaches, is that by allowing players to define that standard, what's acceptable and what's unacceptable, it allows you the permission to enforce those things maybe in a way that wasn't there before. When it was Mark Cassio's rule, and you better be here by whatever the time is, then it almost sometimes seems more confrontational rather than now it's collaborative, right? You're helping to serve them reach the standards that they chose, which I think is an amazing approach.
Yeah, and it goes back to just me being more part of the solution than just giving out consequences. So now it's so much easier where if they're not in the weight room by 6:55, really my first thought process is I hope everything's okay, which is a big change. Before it was all about me and why are they not on time for my workout? And then if they do show up late, it's just, hey man, why were you late? Usually they have a really good reason. It's like, okay, like you're late. It's not okay. Like, let's move on. Let's have a great day. And then if it becomes a habitual thing, then we'll have to enforce some standards or some boundaries and consequences if need be. But most of the time, they know that they were late and they want to be on time, so we can all move forward, getting on the same page.
I remember just I think it was January before COVID, going to you guys and getting to see you guys play in a game and be a part of your practices. And I had been a part of practices before, but I mean, watching you guys in an actual game, there was so much excitement. It was probably later in the year, so I really got to feel the culture where usually I come into programs in the early stage. So it was really, really cool and special. And obviously when I took on the team this year, I was like, all right, well, I'm running Mark's offense because that looks like fun to play and I want to be a part of it. But not only, and I think a lot of coaches see your offense like, man, that looks like a really fun way to play, right? But that's not just what's great about your culture and the experience. Like, there's just a great energy in practice. There's a competitive energy. People are getting after it. Dips for you are like for other coaches, they would be like their peaks, like just that's how high your energy is. So I was just kind of curious if you could share some of the things that you feel have helped to add to that practice environment, creating that competitive energy.
Yeah, I think the first thing is we've shortened practice and we've actually decreased the amount of days that we do practice. So just less is more approach. Um, we shorten practice to go usually 90 minutes. In fact, when I go back and watch our practice film, a lot of times it's like an hour and 12 minutes. If you take out the pre and post practice stuff, I'm like, golly, it doesn't seem like we're hardly practicing, but just being hard, short, very competitive. instead of, a lot of stuff on air and then you're kind of building up to the competition part. We'll start with competition. We've adapted the quick set, which you shared with me, which is a great way to start practice and get our energy level up and set some standards. And then the competitive cauldron too, which has been something that you've helped me with. Just building competition where I think we've always had a program that's going to work hard most days. I think the biggest difference is now we're a competitive program. And I think there's a huge difference there because I think you can be working hard, but not always doing your best and not always, wanting to help your team win. So just having everything is competitive. We keep it in the cauldron. Also build just like a certain level of responsibility or accountability to your teammates. And I think that is a great life lesson and obviously is important with basketball of your behavior, your actions not only affects you, but your teammate. And then it's really helped our engagement throughout practice too. A lot of times our players will ask like, hey, what are we going to? And as far as like the score, or is this counting for the cauldron? And then our skill development counts for the cauldron as well. So it's a very small percentage of weight in the cauldron. But now when we're doing our ball handling stuff or any kind of skill work, there's just adding a competitive element where there usually wasn't. So our skill development stuff is much more intense than it was in the past. And then last, it gives you some data to where if you do have to have some hard conversations with players on their performance in practice, you have some data to go back to. And then as coaches, it'll helps us make decisions. But I think above anything, it just confirms or verifies what we think we're seeing in practice.
If you'd like to learn more about implementing the competitive cauldron like Mark, I've got an online course for that. But also if you're interested in our mentorship program and culture coaching, you can schedule a call with myself or Nate to see if that might be something that's right for you. If you're a basketball coach, I highly recommend you check out courtside-consulting.com. As I got back into coaching this year, I was coaching a pro team in Ireland for a few months. I turned around and I hired Mark to help me with my program when it came to tactical, technical, and even the teaching side. He's not only a master coach, but he is an incredible teacher to other coaches. And it's been really cool to actually see a lot of the TOC community coaches join the Courtside community as well, because they're just a really, really great fit. So check out courtside-consulting.com. And don't forget, next week's episode, we'll be back with Mark to really talk about what I believe is the key to his success.